And the reason why that's important is because, well, one day I was walking, and for those who've seen this presentation before, this is a real story. I walked outside and somebody had driven off the edge of a thing about 6 foot. So the car with the nose of the car was down on the lower level. The back of the car was still sitting up at the upper level. And we'd known the person who drove that vehicle. She was elderly, and she was told to park outside of the condominium complex because she would back into things in the building. So everybody had their opinions, and everybody basically in their heads thought they saw the incident. Well, what it turned out later to be, and that was the discussion while I walked by while the police were doing their investigation. What it turned out later to be was the sun got in there. There was actually a failure of the transmission, and the vehicle went forward instead of backwards. So it was a really odd kind of incident. But everybody there had an opinion, and even though they weren't even in the area, had in their minds physically seen it. And there's a psychology behind that, isn't there, June?
Absolutely. It's called confabulation or memory conformity. People unintentionally fill in gaps based on what they think must have happened. So in RCFA, we've got to weigh human accounts thoughtfully. Valuable, but always corroborated with hard evidence.
And that's exactly when I tell people that the human portion, the interview portion, has no value to me. I need to see data. Because as I come up with different hypotheses, now I use a method called PROACT, in which we have to preserve the evidence and da da da, go through and set up a team, and then you end up branching out on complex issues. So there's a variety of different tools for doing this and methodologies. That's the one I happen to use. So as I come up with each hypothesis, I need real, tangible data in order to prove or disprove that hypothesis. I cannot go off of interview or opinion.
And that's the heart of it. Interviews spark ideas, but data confirms or refutes them. It's like solving a mystery. The story starts the search, but the evidence writes the ending.
Exactly. So we may sit down with a group, and by the way, I always say the RCFA professional must be technically competent in the subject at hand, because I've seen people go down some really funny rabbit holes. But in any case, the idea is to get that group together to come up with as many possibilities as possible. And that can come from standards, books, history, self experience, whatever. But, again, another story. I was in a plant where there was a disagreement about something going on, and everybody from one of the three camps, because it was an argument between, kept referring to an overhead crane doing something at that position. So we got up and walked into the area, and there was no overhead crane anywhere close to that. So that goes back to what you had just talked about, with that conformity, in order to kind of put a puzzle together in order to support conclusions. And that's a big concern. So when I go out into the field and I do a troubleshooting or RCFA, first off, I have to be very, very careful of something called bias. And June, can you define bias in that context?
In that context, bias is when preconceived notions or prior beliefs, whether yours or from the group, subtly steer your analysis toward a conclusion that might not match the evidence. It's like wearing tinted glasses. Everything looks skewed unless you consciously correct for it.
Exactly. And often when I'm called into a situation in which, I mean, because the majority of the time when motor docs called in to a big concern, um, when we're coming in there, what we're looking at is situations that have gone on for weeks, months, years, or a plant's been down for a little while, and often we're scheduled and it's a few weeks or a few months before we can get out there. But we're always looking at these long-standing things, which by the way, as an aside, for those who contact us, is why I usually say walk you through a series of questions, because if I can resolve it over the phone, it's better for you and keeps our schedule open. But when I'm called into those situations, a majority of the time when I walk in, everybody has already decided what's wrong. And instead of following the evidence to come to one or more conclusions as to root cause, they usually have a root cause that they want in mind, and they're trying to force evidence to follow that root cause. And how would you refer to that? Is there a name for that? Sure.
Yeah, that's called confirmation bias. It's
Yeah.
when people start with a conclusion and cherry pick or interpret evidence to fit it, rather than letting the evidence lead. It's the exact trap we avoid in a real RCFA.
And in troubleshooting situations, which I do more of than a true RCFA, I still follow the process. But when I go into a troubleshooting instance, I keep catching myself because, and I'm knowledgeable about this confirmation bias. I keep catching myself sometimes going, yeah, I already know it's wrong, and we're going to do testing to prove that I'm right. So it becomes very challenging, and it becomes uh, very important to recognize in yourself that that bias exists.
Exactly. Being aware of your own bias is half the battle. If you stay vigilant and let the evidence guide the way, that's what keeps troubleshooting honest and effective. No forcing puzzle pieces where they don't fit.